Okay, everybody, welcome to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We're the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church in New Canaan, Connecticut. And I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Elizabeth Garnsey.
And I'm John Kennedy.
And John's trying to get his act together today here for this. We have ourselves a mega story. Jesus calms the storm, and just want everybody to know right out front, when it says a great storm arose, that word is where we get the word mega, and the same thing for the calm, a mega calm. And so let's see if we can have a mega conversation about this mega story. This is Mark 4:35 to 41. When evening had come, Jesus said to his disciples, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on a cushion, and they woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with a great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
This is a great story. To me, this is a kind of the archetypal story, I guess, of Mark. It's, to me, the most crystallized example of what makes Mark stand out among the four Gospels. You know, it's a story about tension. Everything happens on this stormy chaos, and everyone's in doubt, and Jesus is like a little exasperated, and it all ends in kind of head scratching. And
great calm and head scratching. Yeah. Oh, that's a really great place to start. I love that. What do you think of that? I think she's onto something.
I think so too. I think there's head scratching for the disciples, but there's not any head scratching for the story that Mark's telling. This phrase that, "Who is this that even the wind and the sea obey him," is clearly a Christological statement, which in my reflection upon this text and obviously preparation for this conversation, I found very interesting, because Mark, it's sometimes attempted to place the four biblical Gospels on sort of a scale from like low Christology to high Christology, and John is always taking the cake for highest, and Mark is usually claimed to have the lowest. But this is basically, it's not far off from Johannine Christology here.
I don't think that there was head scratching for Mark, but right. I think that Jesus is like, "Why are you afraid?" You know, that he's doubting them, and they're still kind of wondering, what the heck, who is he?
Right.
So they're almost more unnerved by his stilling of the storm than by the storm.
Right.
So anyway, that
is true.
I don't think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the disciples never get it in the Markan drama. They never really get it, and the whole thing builds toward two different climax points, which is, Jesus saying to Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter's response in chapter 8, and then in chapter 15, the centurion's response, "Certainly this is the Son of God." But I want to come back to your Christology thing, because I think just as you got off to a great start, that is absolutely incredibly true about what you say. And so who is this? Well, okay, so he's a prophet greater than Jonah, because Jonah had to call upon God to do it, but now he can do it. And he is the incarnate word of Yahweh doing what Yahweh does, and all these other OT allusions to this. And one of these that I just can't help myself but to say, so he is like Yahweh himself, so to speak. And sorry to give a hymn to Yahweh, but who, when he parts the Red Sea, does it for the 12 tribes, and now he calms the storm for the 12 apostles. But you're right, this is super high Christology stuff here. This is a revelation. It's a revelatory moment.
Yeah, and very interesting, I think, following the parables, which we were just discussing, and to just have a word of context, this passage immediately follows with no gaps where we were last week. Sometimes we get little gaps in our movements through the Gospels in ordinary time, but there's no gap here. So Jesus has just been telling parables in a boat. I guess it's the same boat.
I think that's when it says, just as he was.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just
I
as
think
he
it's
was.
just he was already sitting in the boat.
Right.
And they were like, okay, don't even bother to get out.
Right.
He doesn't have to go to the bathroom before he hits the road like everybody else.
Yeah.
He
Yeah,
just stays
just
right in the boat and
unmoored.
hits the road or hits the sea.
And so the juxtaposition of these parables, which are kind of obscure, there's a hiddenness in the form of the parables themselves. Just using parables as a way to teach is already, the medium is the message, as it's often said. And that is sort of a medium that has factors of qualities of obscurity and opaqueness and so on. It's not entirely clear, at least to the crowds, what Jesus means, perhaps, although it says he explains everything in private to his disciples. So while Jesus has been doing acts of power, which is a word I want to get back to, which perhaps I'm sure the two of you can comment as well, this is something else, right? Like Jesus has been healing, he's been performing exorcisms, but the calming of a storm, power over the chaotic waters, which is a very significant Hebraic biblical image and symbol, power over weather, is of another order. And I think last time we were talking about how, these seed parables teach us that the kingdom of God often progresses and breaks in kind of slow, gradual, and kind of maybe humble ways, which is absolutely true. And then yet there's this, right, which is a juxtaposition. I think juxtapositions and paradoxes and so on are so important in matters of the spirit because they do transcend all of our categories. And I think Mark's narrative is doing this for us as well. Which I love and I find super, super rich and interesting.
Oh yeah, incredible. In fact, you mentioned this kind of I use the word archetypal, but the major Hebraic references, and maybe it's worth it at the outset to read from Psalm 107.
Yeah.
Because this story draws almost directly from the Psalm. I'll just read the few verses, okay? So this is Psalm 107, verses 23 through 29. It says, "Some went down to the sea in ships, doing business on the mighty waters." And of course, Jesus is with his professional fishermen now disciples, right? "They saw the deeds of the Lord, his wondrous works in the deep. For he commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to the heavens. They went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their calamity. They reeled and staggered like drunkards and were at their wits' end. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he brought them out from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed." That's Psalm 107. Clearly,
yeah.
Mark, he's telling a story quite parallel to that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we are robbed of by the context of the world that we grow up in, our small little worlds, our small little religious worlds, is that we don't have all the depth that comes if we knew the Hebrew Scriptures as certainly Jesus did, and as certainly a lot of Mark's hearers would. I mean, the Markan church was a mixed church, but and they would have gotten all these allusions. Thank you for reading the Psalm, but they would have also gotten the story of Jonah, and also the symbolism that the waters in the Hebrew Scriptures are a place of chaos, and so God's power over the chaos, which is what's happening here, all the layering of that. So this story wouldn't have been like, holy smokes, this guy got in a boat and he calmed the storm. Right. It's like he's flexing his muscles, like, wow, man, he's a stud. That's not what's happening here. I mean, that might be happening here too, but that's not the point. The point is that all these allusions would tell them, go, holy smokes, this guy is the revelation of the divine God, Yahweh. That's what all these allusions are pointing toward. Because this is a story, this is a type of archetypal story that's known to them.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's written for people in distress. I mean, incredible chaos and distress, dark times.
Mark's community,
yeah.
Total distress.
And I think the takeaway is trust more in Jesus and realize who he is, the ruler of all nature, and things will come out right.
Yeah, I think the key line on that one is, have you no faith, or where is your faith, which is, that's the statement, which is to say faith is the solution to the chaos here.
Yeah. I want to talk about that, but before we dive into that, I want to say that I totally, of course, agree with the meaning of this passage having a lot to do with who Jesus is vis-a-vis God, that he, in some sense, is God. But I also think it is about Jesus being like the strong guy. And that's because of Mark's earlier passage about tying up the strong man.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So obviously, Mark frames Jesus's work as proclaiming and, in some sense, bringing about the kingdom of God. And I think there is a sense in Mark of warring kingdoms. There's the kingdom of God versus the kingdom of evil, or the kingdom of this world, which is, of course, ruled over by the power of evil. And so Jesus, as we've seen already, has contended with demonic power, powers that seek to, in the language of our baptismal covenant, corrupt and destroy the creatures of God. Jesus is dealing with that. He is healing people of their physical maladies as well, which I think in Mark's theological imagination are a symptom of the power of evil, the kingdom of evil's hold on our world. And even though this is not really how we're inclined to think about, like, weather, natural disasters and strong gales and stuff like that, great storms, I think there's that element in here as well. Again, my interest is, first of all, to get into the world of the scriptures, and I'm not making any claims about weather being evil, but I do kind of see that in the narrative here, that Jesus' calming of the storm, which threatens people who travel on the sea. Right. I mean, we've read, or some of us have read or seen The Perfect Storm. Like, that's no joke.
Yeah. Well, they used to write on maps with unmapped seas that it would just say, "There be dragons."
Yeah, exactly. It's all of a piece here, and in the Hebrew Bible, we have, the chaotic waters, the Leviathan, these fearsome sea creatures, which sort of personify, perhaps from certain points of view, the powers of evil that God contends with and that God ultimately has power over. So I think it actually is sort of like Jesus tying up the strong man in a sense here too.
God.
I would agree that overall that's what Jesus is about. But to me, the strong man isn't this disembodied power of evil, but the human way of casting one another out. And overall, that's always where Jesus is coming back to, that I think he is demonstrating his power over nature and over illness and demonic power by casting out demons and stuff. And a couple of weeks ago, we had the story about Satan, can Satan cast out Satan? And it was about the kingdom divided against itself, which was, the power of the satanic force, the one that it would accuse, the Pharisees were accusing Jesus of having a demon, so being in cahoots with Satan. And by their wanting to cast Jesus out, which eventually they completely do, it goes all the way to the cross, he's saying, can Satan cast out a Satan? And so in the end, his goal is to draw all things to himself, reconcile all things, create a oneness, and not divide. So I think it's important to keep in tension, these warring kingdoms and stuff, but there isn't like an inherent evil, and I don't think you're really saying this, but just so we're clear on the podcast, that it's not nature itself that's evil. Storms are not evil, nature is not evil. But they have a mythic symbolic value in the ancient world, that winds and waves are forces of opposition, and maybe they symbolize everything that's hindering Jesus from boundary crossing and completing his mission, and making the disciples afraid, like all the things that the early church, the early community is up against in Mark's time. So, they have tremendous symbolism as evil powers, but the storm itself is not an actual evil force that Jesus is calming. However, the way he says, be still, be quiet, is the same way that he talks to the demons to cast them out. So you're right. I mean, it's both things. I guess that's all I'm trying to say, is it's both things. Like nature is glorified in the Old Testament, in the Psalms, and in the creation story and all that. And it's all telling the glory of God, right? And rejoicing and stuff. So it's both things, but the symbolic quality here, I think, is quite evocative of these warring forces that you're talking about.
Yeah, interesting. This is a really kind of very interesting counterpointness on this, or maybe they're
ping
just
pong while you're just
different. One, ding, 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 going to U.S. Open
trying to help
tennis.
you with your sermon.
Chung, chung, chung. Yeah. I'm the preacher. On this one, I think that there's it's a kind of both and, but I think. In Mark's gospel, there is no doubt what you're talking about is that right up front there is a sense that Jesus is involved in spiritual warfare here, and that the things that are defeating human beings, whether or not they be the way you're emphasizing it or you're emphasizing it, is both. So that we get Jesus rebuking. The word that used here, rebuking. I mean, here he's calming the scene. He's rebuking nature, but previously he has done healings, and there's been rebukings. We're about to get the casting out of the legion, right? And there's a rebuke there. We're about to get the healing of the hemorrhaging woman, and there's a rebuke there, and the raising of Jairus' daughter. So all of these things, but the power that Jesus is using, Jesus never uses a miracle for himself. The power that Jesus is using in his miracles is the power of love, is the power of mercy, the power of compassion. That's the revelation here, is the divine compassion, and Jesus has the power to make the human condition. It seeks to make the human condition more whole against the forces that try to beat it up, and in this case, the storm tries to beat it up.
Yeah.
And then in the Hebrew Scriptures, there's all these other stories of Yahweh doing the same, trying to get natural forces in line,
right,
so that they don't defeat the peoples.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I find this topic super interesting because, Elizabeth, like you, I have a great, interest seems like too small a word, but, at least interest in ecological spirituality and valuing, the earth, our common home, our island home, as our Eucharistic prayer for the summer puts it, and the profound revelation of God that nature is. I am so on board with that. But I do see like an ambivalence about nature in the Bible, like to a point in that like it's fearsome, it's threatening. It famines, great storms, etc. Are obviously hard to have a spirit of reverence towards when they're like afflicting you. And so anyway, yeah, it's a tension, most definitely. And I think you're absolutely right to bring in how another lens through which nature is viewed in the Hebrew Bible is that the heavens and the earth are telling the glory of God. So it's all in there, I think, and really, really interesting. I mean, I think at the heart of the tension is what is manifest in the drama of Mark, these sort of like warring kingdoms, that like God makes a world that is telling the glory of God, that is God's good creation, and yet is not God. So it sort of has agency to kind of go its own way, and the ways in which that plays out in the more than human world are like super mysterious. But anyway, I don't
actually think this is actually about nature at all. I don't actually think this story of calming the storm is about nature. I think it's about Jesus and the revelation in Jesus. And it just happens that a storm arose. I mean, that's what happens on the Sea of Galilee, and this happened. And it's a demonstration. I mean, it's 700 feet below sea level, surrounded by mountains. And anybody who's ever been on the Sea of Galilee, these winds do arise. So I think that. I think this is a revelatory moment, but I don't really think this is about whether or not nature is.
I think it's a motif in Mark, as I said at the outset. I think the sea, it's not even a sea, it's a freshwater lake. We have the Lake of Galilee.
13 miles long.
But it's not a sea per se.
It's not a sea.
It's not
it's
the
a
ocean.
Lake.
So so 13 is big or small? Anyway.
Small.
Oh, okay,
it's
yeah,
tiny.
so we're agreeing. So yeah, but it's the words evoked have much bigger symbolism.
Oh,
so,
yeah. That's
totally agree.
And I think to stay in the writing, the purpose of the writing of Mark, it was never a history book. It was always a testament to Jesus, as you say, and an encouragement for that community to keep going and to stay anchored. And everything in this gospel is about pushing through chaos and darkness and having faith. And the next time they cross the sea, Jesus has to force them into the boat, and they don't want to get back in there. And also, I don't think it's important to maybe name that what's happening here is they're crossing over to Gentile territory, and they really don't want to go. Jesus really wants to forge this mission, and he ends up on both sides, the Gentiles and the Jewish side, and mirrors his actions on both sides. He casts out demons, he teaches, he heals in both places. And to have the conflict like that, to their minds, in the larger picture, it's just inconceivable that they could reconcile these two worlds. And yet Jesus is doing it back and forth.
Yeah. I think it's a good call to not overstate the importance of nature in this passage. I think it is much more about Jesus's power over everything, and like you said, Elizabeth, very much symbolic about the power of faith in the midst of the storms we face in life. But it's interesting that the question about history and historicity, because this passage has one of these little details that I think many people who do sort of argue for the historicity of these texts point to. I think it's this passage in particular, I think is at least as important as symbolism as it is history. But it says here that Jesus was in the stern asleep on the cushion, and a lot of people like C.S. Lewis, who studied medieval and ancient texts and were just experts in literature, would point at this and say, this is not the detail you see in the Odyssey or mythology. This is not just an abstraction. This is not merely the work of imagination. This is a little detail about Jesus being on the cushion.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing.
We're not in agreement on this one, because I'm all in on the cushion, and she's like, I don't know about that. I'm all in on that cushion.
And another example in Mark would be Simon of Cyrene, the father of Alexander and Rufus. Who are Alexander and Rufus? We don't know. It's just in there. This doesn't seem
I don't think nothing's historical, but I do think a stern, that's where the steering is. Shouldn't Jesus be steering the boat? And he's on a cushion. How gentle, how calm, how easy to and comfortable he is on his cushion, and they are in fear of their lives. So to me it's a literary detail that's perfect and makes sense, but it doesn't. It's to me not a clue that this is a story that actually happened. But maybe it did. I have no reason to think it didn't happen. I'm just saying that it's neither here nor there, because Mark's telling a much bigger truth. It's the good news of God in Jesus Christ, and it's for a community in travail, and the details of all the Gospels mostly complement each other. There's no reason not to think that things didn't happen, but I don't think it's the most important thing that we go and verify details as history. And that's all I meant, as the Gospelers did not set out to write. They were not journalists, checking their facts and interviewing. They were writing tales. They were writing, crafting a huge narrative of Jesus that fit their community's needs in a true way.
Oh, they're absolutely 100% on that. But I want to stick on this, because I'm not willing to surrender the cushion in the way that you are. There's no doubt. I love the cushion.
But I want to know what color it was and how thick it was. Was it waterproof?
So let's just spend a moment on this. So it is for sure the helmsman's place, and Jesus should be at the helmsman's place. And if we really want to pursue this, Jesus as being asleep either points towards his humanity, maybe he's super tired, or asleep in the Bible represents trust in God here. So, everything is layered some more. But let's talk about another historicity piece that even now that Elizabeth doesn't like the cushion, which she's denying she doesn't like the cushion. How about this? There are two boats.
There are other boats with them.
Right. But Mark has no need of the other boats. So we don't hear anything about the poor dudes in the other boat who don't have Jesus in there to complain to. They're just going down, right? So here's another historicity piece that, as Mark crafts it later, he doesn't have any need for, but it's in there too.
And they benefit from the stilling of the storm just the same.
I think so. Yeah. Yeah, very, very interesting.
That is interesting. I know I underlined that. I'm like, this is the very first time in all the many readings of this that I've done that I've noticed that phrase.
Yeah.
I mean, he's trying to get us to land the plane, and we're talking about boats.
Yeah.
I mean, what's this? We should be putting the
Sure, let me show
Right.
our audience the.
I'm trying to get my boat license.
Yeah. I mean, what is with this land the plane thing,
Yeah.
Rob? Don't you know
Dock the ship.
the boat, Rob?
Come ashore.
Okay, we're not going to land this plane here. We're not going to dock. We're going to dock the boat.
Your boat ashore.
Oh man, I just saw some really nice boats on my vacation,
Wow.
but I don't think these are like the ones that Jesus was in for some reason. But yeah, so really, really rich stuff. But since I guess we're supposed to wrap up, I want to talk about the asleepness thing and the like we talked earlier about the tensions and the juxtapositions in Mark's gospel and in all of Scripture and any sort of work of theological and spiritual truth that point us to a divine reality that is beyond what we often can imagine or are inclined to imagine. I think asleep works in that way too. It works on a couple levels because, as you said, being asleep is a sign, is an expression of trust in God that we see in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's in Job. It's elsewhere. In the Psalms, one of the Psalms for Compline, Psalm 4, I lie down in peace at once I fall asleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. And I think that's clearly part of the meaning here. But another way in which I think sleep works as a symbol here is this text we've talked about the meaning of this text for the community, a community that was suffering hardship and persecution and uncertainty and uncertain existence, just like the disciples on the storm here or in the face of the storm here. And I was reading a commentary on this text by St. Ambrose, who was St. Augustine's teacher, and he talked about how the boat in this story is the church. And we are rocked about on the seas of life and threatened by storms to the extent that we are lukewarm, to the extent that the church is lukewarm and Jesus is asleep in us. But if we are, strong in faith, if our faith is alive, then Jesus likewise is awake in us and calms the storms and helps us navigate and move through any storms in our life. So sleep working in two ways then, sort of sleep as Jesus is trusting God, but also sleep perhaps as a symbol of what happens when, like the disciples, we don't really understand who Jesus is and we're not really connecting with him, therefore, as much as we could be.
Well, if we're going to get historical, I mean, Jesus was exhausted.
Yeah.
He was pressed on by the crowds. He'd been teaching and teaching. He was tired, so I think he just went to sleep. And his famous instruction is to keep awake. So I think in the contemplative sense, there is the restfulness that you quoted that beautiful line from the Compline and from the Scriptures. So definitely it is a sense of resting peacefully in the arms of God and everything. Here, I think that Jesus has a calmness in the midst of the storm, and that's like the symbol of the story. Is that sometimes God doesn't calm our storms, but he could calm us in the middle of the storm. Somebody else said that in a quote that I can't attribute, but I mean, I don't know if Jesus, I think he was just tired, but they were right to wake him up.
Yeah. Okay. So interesting. There is an incredible sermon that Augustine gave on this passage. I think it's Sermon 53, where he talks about when the winds arise in us, when we are battered, when people say negative things about us. I mean, he brings us down to our own lives, and he says that it's time to wake up Jesus who's asleep within us. So, right, Augustine following Ambrose. Hey, we hope that you're not asleep because we went beyond Rob's land the plane. Rob, thank you very much. Right. Yeah. Rob's got a shirt on today that says "Speak Out," and so we spoke out against Rob here today because we just weren't going to take it. I mean, we have to rise up, right?
Yeah,
that's right.
We're resisting the power of evil.
To keep paddling.
Resisting the power. So we're resisting Rob's power. We hope we haven't put you to sleep. We hope that you have a mega great time trying to deal with this mega story, because this is a phenomenal story, and Mark gives it to us in such few sentences, and we just gave it to you in so many sentences. So peace be with you. God bless you. Like, subscribe, do any of that sort of stuff, because we like it when you do it. Take care.